September 6, 1976, 9:52 a.m., Chuguyevka Air Base, Soviet Far East. Lieutenant Viktor Belenko climbs into the cockpit of his MiG-25 Foxbat. Outside temperature, 68 degrees Fahrenheit, clear skies, perfect flying weather. His flight suit is standard issue. His helmet carries no special markings. To the ground crew fueling the aircraft, this is a routine training mission. Belenko has flown this profile 47 times in the past 6 months. But this morning, something is different. Inside the left breast pocket of his flight suit, folded into a square no bigger than a playing card, is a Japanese navigation chart. He memorized it 3 weeks ago. Then he burned it. The information is now encoded in neural pathways, invisible to the KGB officers who monitor every Soviet pilot, every minute of every day. Belenko's heart rate is 58 beats per minute. Trained calm. Operational discipline. He's about to commit the most consequential act of aerial defection in Cold War history, and his hands are steady on the control stick. The MiG-25 Foxbat is the Soviet Union's most classified weapon system. NATO intelligence has been trying to understand this aircraft since 1967, when it first appeared in satellite photography. Western analysts believe it's constructed almost entirely of titanium. They believe it can sustain speeds exceeding Mach 3 for extended periods. They believe its avionics represent the cutting edge of Soviet technology. In approximately 90 minutes, Viktor Belenko is going to prove that nearly everything the West believes about the MiG-25 is wrong. The story begins not with the flight, but with the aircraft itself. In 1959, the United States Air Force unveiled the XB-70 Valkyrie program, a Mach 3 plus strategic bomber capable of flying at 70,000 feet, beyond the reach of Soviet interceptors. The bomber could penetrate Soviet airspace, deliver nuclear weapons, and escape before defenses could respond. The Soviet response was immediate and desperate. They needed an interceptor capable of reaching Mach 3, climbing to 80,000 feet, and carrying missiles powerful enough to destroy American bombers at those altitudes and speeds. The McCoy and Gurevich Design Bureau was tasked with the impossible. Build the world's fastest operational interceptor. Do it with 1960s Soviet technology. Do it fast. Do it cheap. Chief designer Mikhail Gurevich made a series of decisions that would define the MiG-25's legacy. First, forget maneuverability. The aircraft doesn't need to dogfight. It needs to climb fast, fly straight, fire missiles, and return home. Second, forget range. Soviet doctrine calls for interceptors to operate near their bases. 500 miles is sufficient. Third, forget efficiency. If the engines consume fuel like a forest fire, install bigger fuel tanks. Fourth, forget electronic sophistication. Use what works, even if it's old technology. The result was the MiG-25. First flight, March 6, 1964. Operational deployment, 1970. The aircraft that emerged was unlike anything else in aviation. Twin Tumansky R-15BD 300 turbojet engines, each producing 24,700 pounds of thrust in afterburner. Total thrust, 49,400 pounds. For context, that's more raw power than the engines that launched the Apollo missions. But that power came with a cost. At full afterburner, the MiG-25 consumed fuel at a rate of 26,000 pounds per hour. The aircraft carried 32,000 pounds of fuel. At maximum power, endurance was measured in minutes, not hours. The airframe was constructed primarily of nickel steel, not titanium. Steel, the metal you use to build bridges and railroad tracks. Why? Because at the speeds the MiG-25 would fly, aerodynamic heating would raise skin temperatures to 300 degrees Celsius. Aluminum would melt. Titanium would be ideal, but the Soviet Union didn't have enough titanium production capacity to build an entire airframe. So they used steel for 80% of the structure and reserved titanium for the hottest areas around the engines. The result, an interceptor that weighed 64,000 pounds fully loaded. For comparison, the American F-15 Eagle Introduced in 1972, weighed 45,000 pounds. The avionics were even more controversial. While American aircraft were transitioning to solid-state transistor electronics, the MiG-25 used vacuum tubes, the same technology that powered radios in the 1940s, hundreds of them glowing like Christmas lights inside the fuselage. Western intelligence saw satellite photographs of the MiG-25 and drew conclusions. They saw a large aircraft and assumed lightweight titanium construction. They saw high-altitude capability and assumed sophisticated electronics. They saw speed records and assumed a technological marvel. They were half right. Viktor Ivanovich Belenko was born February 15, 1947 in Nalchik, Russian SFSR. His father was a tractor driver. His mother worked in a textile factory. There was nothing in his childhood that suggested he would become one of the most consequential defectors in Cold War history. Except one thing. At age 10, he watched a MiG-15 perform aerobatics over his village. The aircraft carved loops and rolls across the sky. Belenko decided then that he would become a pilot. Soviet military aviation was brutally selective. Approximately 50,000 young men applied to flight school each year. 2,000 were accepted. Belenko was accepted in 1965, age 18. The training was comprehensive and unforgiving. The Soviet doctrine emphasized technical proficiency over individual creativity. Pilots learned to fly by numbers, by procedures, by strict adherence to doctrine. Initiative was discouraged. Obedience was mandatory. Belenko excelled. By 1971, he was flying the MiG-21. By 1974, he had transitioned to the MiG-25. By 1976, he was a senior lieutenant in the 513th Fighter Regiment, stationed at Chuguyevka Air Base, 50 kilometers from the Soviet-Chinese border. He was 29 years old. He was a skilled pilot with an exemplary record. He had a wife and a young son. By Soviet standards, his life was successful, and he was planning to betray everything. The decision didn't happen suddenly. It accumulated over years, built from 1,000 small disillusionment. The chronic shortages of basic goods. The propaganda that promised prosperity while citizens stood in breadlines. The surveillance, the mistrust, the assumption that every citizen was a potential traitor. In 1975, Belenko was selected for additional political training. Officers from the KGB's Third Directorate lectured him on ideological vigilance, on the dangers of Western corruption, on the necessity of reporting suspicious behavior among fellow pilots. The message was clear: you are trusted to fly a MiG-25, but you are not trusted as a human being. Belenko made his decision. He would defect. He would take the MiG-25 with him. Planning an aerial defection from the Soviet Union in 1976 was nearly impossible. Every flight was monitored. Ground control tracked every aircraft from takeoff to landing. Deviation from assigned flight paths triggered immediate investigation. Unauthorized landings meant court-martial and probable execution. Belenko's advantage: he flew along the Soviet coast near Japan. The distance from Chuguyevka to Japanese airspace was approximately 160 kilometers. At the MiG-25 speed, that translated to roughly 5 minutes of flight time. 5 minutes. That was his window. He studied Japanese navigation charts obtained through channels he would never reveal. He memorized the location of Hakodate Airport on the northern Japanese island of Hokkaido. Commercial airport, long runway, close to the coast. He planned for September 6th, a Monday. Training flights were scheduled. Weather forecast, clear. He told no one, not his wife, not his closest friends. Defection laws in the Soviet Union were absolute. Any family member who knew of defection plans and failed to report them faced prison or execution. The KGB called it betrayal of the motherland. The penalty was death. Belenko kept his silence, to protect himself, to protect his family. On September 5th, he said goodbye to his wife and son. Normal conversation. Routine farewell. He knew he would never see them again. September 6th, 1976, 9:52 a.m. The MiG-25 requires 20 minutes of pre-flight preparation. Belenko and his ground crew work through the checklist. Fuel, 32,000 pounds loaded. Weapons, 2 R-40 air-to-air missiles, each weighing 1,000 pounds, designed to destroy American bombers at 70,000 feet. The cockpit of the MiG-25 is cramped. The instrument panel is a wall of analog gauges: airspeed indicator, altimeter, vertical speed indicator, engine instruments, fuel gauges, weapons systems. Everything is mechanical. No digital displays, no computers. At 9:52 a.m., Belenko starts the engines. The Tamansky R-15S roar to life. Distinctive sound, deep, resonant thunder. Citizens living near Soviet air bases can identify a MiG-25 by sound alone. Ground control clears him for takeoff. Assigned mission, air combat training over the Sea of Japan. Maximum altitude, 40,000 feet. Duration, 90 minutes. Return to base. Belenko acknowledges. His voice is calm, professional. He advances the throttles. The MiG-25 accelerates down the runway. Liftoff is speed, 190 miles per hour. At that speed, the aircraft becomes airborne almost reluctantly. It doesn't leap into the air like a fighter. It climbs like a freight train, massive and inevitable. Belenko raises the landing gear, retracts the flaps, climbs to 5,000 feet. Then he does something unexpected. He descends. At 1,500 feet, he levels off. Soviet ground radar is designed to track high-altitude contacts. At low altitude, the MiG-25's radar signature blends with ground clutter. He becomes nearly invisible. Ground control notices. They call him. "What is your altitude?" Belenko responds, experiencing pressurization problems, descending to safe altitude. It's plausible. The MiG-25's pressurization system is temperamental. Failures are common. Ground control accepts the explanation. But they're watching. Belenko turns east, toward the coast, toward Japan. At 1,500 feet and 500 miles per hour, he crosses the Soviet coastline. Ahead, the Sea of Japan. Beyond that, Hokkaido. Beyond that, freedom. Behind him, 6 Soviet interceptors scramble from Chuguyevka. The KGB has realized what's happening. Soviet air defense protocols for defection scenarios are specific and ruthless. Shoot down the defecting aircraft. Recover the wreckage. Deny everything. 6 MiG-23 fighters climb to intercept Belenko's MiG-25. They have orders to destroy him before he reaches Japanese airspace. But Belenko has advantages. First, the MiG-25 is faster than the MiG-23. At low altitude, the difference is marginal, but it's enough. Second, he has a head start. By the time the MiG-23s are airborne, he's already 50 kilometers from the coast. Third, he's willing to die trying. The Sea of Japan stretches ahead. 160 kilometers of open water. No landmarks, no navigation aids, just sea and sky. Belenko flies by compass, by memory, by calculation. He's memorized the heading, 110 degrees, due east-southeast, direct to Hakodate. The fuel gauges drop rapidly. The MiG-25 is designed for high-altitude interception, where thin air reduces drag. At low altitude, aerodynamic drag increases exponentially. The engines scream, consuming fuel at catastrophic rates. Belenko calculates. He has enough fuel for approximately 25 minutes at this speed and altitude. Hakodate is 15 minutes away. Narrow margins. Behind him, Soviet ground control is broadcasting. Return to base immediately. This is a direct order. He doesn't respond. The MiG-23s are closing. Not fast enough to intercept, but close enough to worry about. If he has to dodge missiles, he'll burn too much fuel. He won't make Japan. 10 minutes into the flight, Belenko sees the Japanese coastline. Hokkaido. Dead ahead. He crosses into Japanese airspace at 10:18 a.m. The Soviet fighters turn back. They cannot follow. Pursuing him into Japanese airspace would trigger an international incident. Possibly war. Belenko is safe, for now. Hakodate Airport is a civilian facility, commercial traffic, no military presence. The control tower handles domestic flights, small passenger aircraft, cargo planes. At 10:20 a.m., controllers notice an unidentified radar contact approaching from the west at 500 miles per hour. Low altitude, no transponder signal, no radio contact. They broadcast on emergency frequencies. No response. At 10:22 a.m., the MiG-25 appears. Silver-gray camouflage. Soviet red stars on the wings. Enormous. Loud. Descending toward the runway. Controllers clear the airspace. Emergency vehicles scramble. Belenko lines up for approach. But there's a problem. Hakodate's main runway is 8,200 feet long. Adequate for commercial aircraft. Inadequate for a MiG-25 landing hot with minimal fuel. Belenko has no choice. He's flying a 64,000-pound aircraft with nearly empty tanks. He cannot abort. He cannot go around. This is his only chance. He extends the landing gear, lowers the flaps. The MiG-25 slows to approach speed, 180 miles per hour. Still too fast. He crosses the runway threshold at 190 miles per hour. Touches down 1,000 feet from the start of the runway. The tires hit concrete, smoke instantly. Belenko slams on the brakes. The MiG-25 does not have anti-lock brakes, does not have thrust reversers. It has mechanical brakes and momentum. 7,000 feet remaining. 6,000. 5,000. Belenko is standing on the brake pedals. The aircraft is decelerating but not fast enough. 3,000 feet. 2,000. 1,000. The end of the runway rushes toward him at 60 miles per hour. The MiG-25 crashes through the perimeter fence. Metal tears. Wire snaps. The aircraft plows into a field beyond the runway, throwing up dirt and grass, and finally, stops. Belenko sits in the cockpit for 10 seconds. He's alive. He's in Japan. He's free. He shuts down the engines. Silence. After the roar of the Timansky turbojets, the silence is overwhelming. Japanese police and airport security arrive within minutes. They surround the aircraft, weapons drawn, uncertain what they're seeing. A Soviet military aircraft. On Japanese soil. No prior warning. No communication. Belenko opens the canopy, climbs onto the wing, raises his hands. In broken English, he says, "I seek political asylum." The diplomatic crisis begins immediately. The Soviet Union demands the return of the MiG-25 and the defecting pilot. Soviet ambassador to Japan Dmitry Polyansky delivers a formal protest within hours. The aircraft is Soviet property. The pilot is a criminal. Japan must comply with international law and return both immediately. Japan refuses. The United States government expresses immediate interest. The MiG-25 has been a mystery for 12 years. American intelligence has produced thick reports speculating about its capabilities, construction, and technology. Now, unexpectedly, one has landed intact on the doorstep of a close American ally. American technical teams arrive within 24 hours. They transport the MiG-25 to a hangar at Hakodate. They begin disassembly. What they find shocks them. The Americans expect titanium. They find steel. The airframe is 80% nickel steel. Heavy, strong, heat-resistant, but primitive by Western standards. American fighters like the F-15 use aluminum and titanium extensively to reduce weight. The MiG-25 doesn't bother. The engineers are confused. Why build a fighter from steel? Steel is heavy. Heavy aircraft are slow. Slow aircraft lose dogfights. Then they examine the engines. And they understand. The Timansky R-15BD-300 engines are brute force incarnate. No sophisticated metallurgy. No advanced turbine blade design. Just raw, overwhelming power. The engines produce so much thrust that weight becomes less relevant. The MiG-25 doesn't climb because it's light. It climbs because it has 49,400 pounds of thrust. But the fuel consumption is catastrophic. At military power, Without afterburner, the engines consume 12,000 pounds per hour. At full afterburner, 26,000 pounds per hour. The Americans calculate maximum range at low altitude is approximately 450 miles. At high altitude, 800 miles. For comparison, the F-15 Eagle has a range exceeding 2,000 miles. The MiG-25 is not designed to fly far. It's designed to climb fast, intercept bombers, and return home. Next, the avionics. American engineers remove access panels and stare in disbelief. Vacuum tubes, hundreds of them, glowing orange in the dim light of the hangar, the same technology used in the 1940s radios. American fighters in 1976 use solid-state transistor electronics. Smaller, lighter, more reliable, less power consumption. The MiG-25 is using technology from 30 years ago. Why? The answer is both simple and profound. Vacuum tubes are immune to electromagnetic pulse, EMP, from nuclear explosions. In a nuclear war scenario, solid-state electronics would be fried instantly. Vacuum tubes would continue functioning. The Soviets designed the MiG-25 to operate in a nuclear battlefield. Additionally, vacuum tubes are more resistant to radiation. Soviet doctrine assumed that MiG-25 pilots might operate in irradiated airspace after nuclear strikes. Transistors degrade under radiation. Tubes do not. The Americans realize this isn't primitive technology. It's deliberate design philosophy. The radar system is massive. The RP-25 Smerch-A Tornado radar is the most powerful airborne radar in the world in 1976. It can detect bomber-sized targets at 100 kilometers. It can track multiple targets simultaneously. The radar's brute force power compensates for lack of sophistication. But it's heavy. The radar system weighs 1,200 pounds. American radars with similar performance weigh half that. The weapons system: 4 R-40 air-to-air missiles. Each missile weighs 1,000 pounds. They're designed to destroy B-52 bombers at 70,000 feet and Mach 2.5. The missiles are huge, powerful, and have a range of 50 miles. But they're not agile. They cannot track maneuvering fighters. They're designed for one mission: intercept bombers flying in straight lines. The flight controls are purely mechanical. No fly-by-wire, no computer assistance. Cable and pulley systems connect the control stick to control surfaces. At high speeds, the control forces become enormous. Pilots describe the MiG-25 as requiring both hands on the stick to execute turns above Mach 2. The Americans test the engines. They run them at full power. The Tumansky R-15s produce exactly the thrust the Soviets claimed, 24,700 pounds each in afterburner. But there's a catch. At maximum power, the engines overheat within 5 minutes. Turbine blades begin to deform. Bearings begin to fail. The engines are designed for short bursts of maximum power, not sustained operation. And the speed limit: officially, the MiG-25 is rated for Mach 2.83. Pilots are forbidden from exceeding this speed. Why? Because above Mach 2.83, aerodynamic heating exceeds the structural limits of the steel airframe. The aircraft begins to warp. Rivets pop. Fuel tanks crack. Can it fly faster? Yes. Viktor Belenko later confirms that MiG-25 pilots have exceeded Mach 3 in emergencies, but every aircraft that did so required extensive repairs afterward. Some were written off entirely. The Americans conclude the MiG-25 is not a technological marvel. It's a brilliant solution to a specific problem using deliberately simple technology. It cannot dogfight. At high speeds, it handles like a freight train. Turning radius at Mach 2 exceeds 20 miles. Any attempt at aggressive maneuvering above Mach 2.5 risks structural failure. It cannot operate at long range. Fuel consumption limits missions to 90 minutes or less. It cannot survive in contested airspace against modern fighters. The F-15 Eagle can outmaneuver it effortlessly at any speed below Mach 2. But if the mission is intercepting high-altitude bombers, the MiG-25 is devastating. It climbs to 80,000 feet faster than any Western fighter. It carries missiles powerful enough to destroy bombers with a single hit. And its vacuum tube electronics will continue functioning even after nuclear weapons detonate. The Americans realize they've been fighting the wrong war. They designed the F-15 to counter a maneuverable Soviet fighter that could challenge American air superiority. The Soviets designed the MiG-25 to destroy American bombers in a nuclear war. Different missions, different design philosophies, different definitions of success. The geopolitical fallout is immediate. The Soviet Union is humiliated. One of their most classified weapon systems is now in American hands, disassembled and analyzed. Every secret revealed. Every weakness exposed. Soviet response is predictable and brutal. 4 officers at Chuguievka Air Base are arrested. They are charged with failure to maintain ideological vigilance. All 4 are executed within a month. Their families are relocated to remote regions of Siberia. Viktor Belenko's wife and son are interrogated for weeks. They claim no knowledge of his defection plans. The KGB doesn't believe them, but they lack evidence. Instead of execution, they face social destruction. Belenko's wife loses her job. His son is expelled from school. They are moved to a different city, given new identities, and forbidden from speaking about Viktor Belenko. The Soviet Air Force implements immediate security changes. All pilots are subject to increased surveillance. Flight paths are more strictly controlled. Ground radar coverage is expanded. Penalties for deviations become more severe, and they begin redesigning the MiG-25. The result, introduced in 1981, is the MiG-31. It addresses many of the MiG-25's weaknesses. Improved engines with better fuel efficiency, modern avionics with digital systems, enhanced radar, better low-altitude performance, but the fundamental philosophy remains: interceptor, not fighter. Speed over maneuverability, power over efficiency. Viktor Belenko never returns to the Soviet Union. The United States grants him political asylum. He settles in America. He marries an American woman. He works as a consultant for the Department of Defense, providing insights into Soviet aviation doctrine and pilot training. He writes a book, MiG Pilot: The Final Escape of Lieutenant Belenko, published in 1980. It becomes a bestseller. In it, he describes life in the Soviet military, the decision to defect, and the flight to Japan. He describes the MiG-25 with a mix of respect and frustration. It was a rocket with wings, he writes. Fast, powerful, and utterly unforgiving. One mistake, and you were dead. But for its mission, it was perfect. When American journalists ask him about the primitive technology, he responds, "You call them vacuum tubes. We called them reliability. You can repair a vacuum tube with a screwdriver and spare parts. Try repairing a circuit board in a field maintenance depot 5,000 kilometers from Moscow." He lives quietly, changes his name, avoids publicity. As of 2024, he is still alive, residing somewhere in the United States under an assumed identity. The MiG-25's legacy is complex. Western intelligence overestimated its capabilities for years. But when the truth was revealed, they discovered something unexpected. The Soviets had built an aircraft that perfectly matched their doctrine, using technology they could produce reliably and maintain in the field. The MiG-25 never shot down an American bomber. The XB-70 Valkyrie program was canceled in 1969. The strategic bomber threat the MiG-25 was designed to counter never materialized. But over 1,100 MiG-25s were built. They served in Soviet and Allied air forces for decades. Export customers included Libya, Syria, Iraq, Algeria, and India. MiG-25s flew reconnaissance missions over Israel in the 1970s and 1980s, photographing military installations from altitudes Israeli fighters could not reach. During the Gulf War in 1991, an Iraqi MiG-25 shot down an American Fa-18 Hornet, the only confirmed coalition aircraft lost to air-to-air combat in that conflict. The MiG-25 pilot fired a single R-40 missile from maximum range. The missile hit. The Hornet was destroyed. The Americans analyzed the engagement. Their conclusion: the MiG-25 succeeded not through sophisticated technology, but through tactical surprise and brute force weapons. The same philosophy that defined the aircraft's design. There are two ways to tell the story of the MiG-25. The first is the Western narrative: primitive Soviet technology, inferior materials, outdated electronics. A fighter that looked fearsome but proved disappointing upon inspection. The second is the engineering truth: a brilliantly optimized machine designed to perform a specific mission using available technology and resources. Both are accurate. Both miss the larger point. The MiG-25 was never designed to be elegant. It was designed to work, to climb to 80,000 feet in under 5 minutes, to carry missiles powerful enough to destroy bombers, to operate in a nuclear battlefield where electronics fail and radiation saturates the air. And it did all of that, reliably, for decades. When Viktor Belenko landed at Hakodate in 1976, he handed the Americans the most valuable intelligence coup of the decade. But what they learned wasn't what they expected. They expected technological secrets, advanced materials, cutting-edge avionics. What they found was a reminder: sophistication is not the same as effectiveness. Complexity is not the same as capability. The MiG-25 was junk held together by genius: steel instead of titanium, vacuum tubes instead of transistors, crude welds instead of precision manufacturing, and it could fly Mach 3 at 80,000 feet. Sometimes the simplest solution is the right solution. Sometimes brute force beats elegance. Sometimes genius lies not in adding features, but in removing everything that isn't essential. The Americans learned this lesson in a hangar in Hakodate in 1976. The Soviets knew it all along.